The slap cracked through the dining room like a whip sharp and sudden, stealing the air from my lungs. My cheek stung hot, and my head jerked sideways from the force. I swayed, gripping the edge of the table to keep from falling. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie suddenly turned sour in my stomach. 12 pairs of eyes locked on me. Some widened in shock, others narrowed with smug satisfaction. And a few, God help me, looked like they were enjoying the show. My husband, Ethan Whitmore, stood over me with his hands still raised, chest heaving, face twisted with a fury that had become far too familiar. He was 6 feet of calculated charm, turned predator in an instant, and tonight, he had decided to make his point in front of everyone he loved. "Don't you ever embarrass me in front of my family again, Rachel." He snarled, his voice low and dripping venom. My name sounded foreign on his tongue, like something he wanted to spit out. At the far end of this table, his mother Marjorie smirked as if this was overdue justice. His sister Claire rolled her eyes, and his brother-in-law Scott chuckled under his breath. My humiliation was entertainment for them. I should have felt small, destroyed. Instead, I felt something else entirely. A stillness, an awareness that the ground was shifting beneath all of us. Because in that moment, from the far corner of the room, a small voice cut through the suffocating silence. "Daddy." The sound was steady, deliberate, almost unnervingly calm for a child. Every head turned toward my daughter Lily. She was 9 years old, slight and dark-haired like me, with eyes that could slice through lies like glass. She stood near the window, clutching her iPad to her chest like a shield. Her gaze was locked on Ethan, and whatever he saw there made his expression falter for the first time that night. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her tone flat, but loaded like she was simply stating a fact. Ethan's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" But his voice cracked, betraying a crack in his armor. Lily tilted her head slightly, studying him like he was an insect under glass. "Because now Grandpa is going to see." The words landed like a grenade in the center of the table. Conversation died instantly. Even the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel seemed to pause. Ethan's face drained of color, going from red to ashen gray in seconds. Marjorie's smirk twitched, faltering. Claire's fork hovered in midair. Scott glanced between us with a frown. "What are you talking about?" Ethan asked again, but there was something brittle in his tone now, a note of uncertainty that I hadn't heard in years. Lily's small hands tightened around her iPad. "I've been recording you, Daddy. Everything. For weeks. And I sent it all to Grandpa this morning." The room seemed to shrink around us, the air thick enough to choke on. I could see the calculations racing through Ethan's mind, the sudden realization of what she meant, who her grandfather was, and what this would mean for him. The powerful, untouchable image he had built so carefully in front of this family was starting to crumble. And Lily, my sweet, watchful Lily, was the one swinging the wrecking ball. In that frozen instant, as his confident posture sagged and his eyes darted around the table for allies, I understood something vital. This night wasn't going to end the way Ethan planned. For years, I had been the one to flinch, to step back to keep the peace at the cost of my own dignity. But now my daughter had stepped into the fire without hesitation, her weapon a cold, simple truth he couldn't outrun. The predator had just been marked for the hunt, and for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid. I didn't yet know every detail of what Lily had done, or how far she had gone to protect us, but I knew this, whatever came next, it was already in motion. And Ethan, for all his arrogance and cruelty, could feel it too. He was about to learn that the smallest voice in the room could be the one that brought him down. Tonight, Thanksgiving dinner would not end with pie and coffee. Tonight, it would end with consequences. 2 months earlier, I was standing in our kitchen with my back to the counter trying to keep my voice calm, as Ethan towered over me. The argument had started over something so trivial, I couldn't even remember the spark. Probably the wrong brand of coffee, or that I'd forgotten to iron his shirt for a meeting. That was always how it went. The fights weren't about the thing he claimed they were about. They were about control. He stepped in close, his breath hot against my face, and jabbed a finger into my shoulder. "You don't listen, Rachel. You don't respect me. And if you keep pushing me, you're going to regret it." I had learned the hard way that regret meant bruises in places no one could see, icy silences that lasted for days, and subtle threats about what might happen if I ever thought about leaving. The last time he taught me a lesson, I had ended up in the emergency room with a sprained wrist and a cut on my forehead. I told the nurse I had slipped in the shower. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but she didn't push. Ethan's job in real estate paid more than I could dream of making, and his family's influence stretched into the local courts and police. If I left without proof, I knew how the story would go. I was a bitter wife making up lies because I wanted his money. Worse, I risked losing Lily. In custody battles, money talks, and Ethan knew it. He had even told me once in a moment of rage that if I left him, he'd make sure Lily stayed with him, not me. That single threat was enough to keep me frozen in place for years. But Ethan wasn't the only one paying attention in our house. Lily had started noticing things. She was too smart not to. She knew the difference between an accidental bruise and one you try to hide. She could read the tension in my shoulders when I heard his car in the driveway. One night after Ethan had slammed a door so hard the glass in a picture frame shattered, she found me sweeping up the shards with tears running down my face. She didn't ask if I was okay, she already knew. Instead, she said quietly, "We need to remember this." I didn't understand what she meant at first. I thought she was just speaking in that strangely old soul way she sometimes did. But weeks later, I saw her sitting on the couch with her iPad angled toward the kitchen doorway recording Ethan yelling because dinner was 5 minutes late. My heart stopped. I rushed over, snatched the tablet from her hands, and told her never to do that again. If he saw her, if he realized, "It's not for him," she interrupted, eyes calm and certain. "It's for us. We need proof, Mom. We need something they can't ignore." She was right. Without proof, all I had were my words against his. And in Ethan's world, my words were worthless. Still, the idea terrified me. I didn't want her involved. But Lily had already made up her mind. Over the next few weeks, she started keeping her iPad close, always within reach. She was subtle, careful. She recorded short clips, never enough to draw attention. Sometimes it was just audio, his voice dripping with contempt, his insults like knives in the dark. Other times it was video, him shoving me into a wall, grabbing my wrist hard enough to leave marks, knocking a glass from my hand so it shattered on the floor. She never gloated about what she was doing. She just kept going, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The stakes weren't just my safety anymore. They were hers, too. I knew if Ethan ever found out, the explosion would be immediate and devastating. But Lily didn't seem afraid. She had a quiet kind of steel I hadn't noticed before, and I couldn't decide if it made me proud or broke my heart. Then one night I found out she'd gone even further. I came into the living room to see her FaceTiming with my father, her grandpa James Parker, retired police captain, widowed, the kind of man who still carried himself like he was on duty. He adored Lily, but I had kept him at a distance since marrying Ethan, because Ethan didn't like him. Too judgmental, Ethan had said. Too nosy. Now I understood why. Grandpa Lily was saying, "What would you do if someone was hurting my mom?" He didn't answer right away. His voice when it came was low and careful. "Is someone hurting her sweetheart?" "Just hypothetically," she said. His silence was heavier this time. "Hypothetically, I'd make sure they never got the chance again. I'd make sure the law knew exactly what they'd done. And I'd make sure they paid for it." Lily smiled, not the warm, childlike smile I knew so well, but something sharper. That's what I thought. She ended the call when she saw me standing there, her expression unreadable. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just gathering evidence for some vague someday. She was planning something. She was setting the stage. And she had just recruited an ally who knew exactly how to take a man like Ethan apart, piece by piece. The stakes had just gone from survival to something else entirely, something that looked a lot like retribution. Ethan's cruelty didn't grow in a vacuum. It was cultivated, nurtured, and applauded by the very people sitting around that Thanksgiving table. I learned that the hard way during my first holiday with the Whitmore family 3 months after our wedding. Back then, I still thought the sharp remarks from his mother were just bad attempts at humor, that his sister's constant digs were some sort of sibling rivalry I didn't understand. I thought wrong. Marjorie Whitmore Ethan's mother was a woman who could smile sweetly while slicing you to pieces with her words. She had been the queen of her household for decades, ruling with a velvet glove that concealed steel claws. She liked to say she'd raised Ethan to be a real man, by which she meant a man who demanded respect without earning it, who took what he wanted without asking, and who believed compromise was for the weak. She also liked to remind me in front of anyone who would listen that I had married up. Marjorie came from money and old connections in the city. My parents were working class. In her eyes, that was all that needed to be said. The first time she called me a charity case, I laughed, thinking she was joking. She didn't laugh. Claire, Ethan's older sister, inherited her mother's talent for weaponized politeness. Every time we met, she found some new angle to chip at me. She'd compliment my dress, then point out that it was brave to wear something off the rack. She'd ask about my work, then remark how nice it must be not to have the pressure of a real career. It was constant, exhausting, and carefully calculated, so that if I ever protested, I would look overly sensitive. Scott Clare's husband wasn't as subtle. He didn't need to be. He would just laugh at their comments, shaking his head like I was some hapless fool who didn't know her place. Over time, I saw how they worked together like a pack, probing for weaknesses, reinforcing Ethan's dominance, making sure I stayed in the role they'd assigned me, the grateful outsider who owed them everything. Ethan thrived in that environment. Whenever we visited, he transformed into the perfect son and brother, attentive and charming. The moment we left, he'd be cold, irritated, picking fights over nothing. I started to realize the pattern. His family tore me down with words, and Ethan followed up with actions when we were alone. It was a cycle, and I was trapped in the middle of it. The more I tried to win them over, the worse it got. I thought maybe if I showed I was worthy, if I was gracious enough, helpful enough, if I played along, they would soften. Instead, they just took my compliance as permission to push further. Lily had seen it too. She was only 9, but kids notice things adults think they can hide. She noticed how I never sat all the way back in my chair when Marjorie was talking, how my smile got tighter when Claire asked innocent questions. She noticed how Ethan laughed at their jabs instead of defending me. And she noticed how, after every family gathering, I seemed quieter, smaller. One night she asked me why we kept going to see them if they made me so sad. I told her family was complicated, that sometimes you had to put up with things for the sake of peace. She frowned at that like it didn't make sense. Now I know why, because she was already thinking ahead, already deciding she would not be bound by my version of peace. The truth was, the Whitmores didn't just dislike me. They saw me as an inconvenience, an obstacle between Ethan and whatever ideal image they had for his life. And because they didn't think I mattered, they didn't care what happened to me when the doors were closed. Ethan's violence wasn't something they didn't see. It was something they chose to ignore and sometimes even encourage. That's why what Lily did mattered so much. She wasn't just standing up to her father. She was standing up to the entire system that had kept me in place for years. She was challenging the rules of their twisted little kingdom. And deep down, I think she understood something I hadn't let myself believe until that moment. At the Thanksgiving table, you can't make peace with people who benefit from your silence. You can only take away their power. By the time Thanksgiving week rolled around, the tension in our house was like a live wire. One wrong move, and everything would ignite. Ethan's family was due to arrive in 2 days, and he was in what I had come to recognize as performance mode. This meant every detail had to be perfect, not because he cared about me or the home, but because their approval was his oxygen. He inspected the dining room like a general reviewing troops, pointing out smudges on the glassware, rearranging chairs by inches, and criticizing the tablecloth I had ironed twice. "You're not taking this seriously, Rachel," he snapped when I asked if we could sit down for dinner. "Do you want my family to think we live like slobs?" We didn't. The house was spotless, but spotless wasn't enough for Ethan. Nothing ever was. That week his temper was shorter than usual, and his outbursts came faster. On Tuesday, he knocked a plate out of my hands when he saw a chip in the rim. On Wednesday, He shoved the pantry door so hard it splintered because I'd bought the wrong kind of crackers for the cheese tray. Lily kept her distance during these moments, but I could see her watching, memorizing. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. The morning of Thanksgiving, I woke to the sound of cabinets slamming. Ethan was already in the kitchen berating me for sleeping in while he made coffee. It was 6:30 a.m. "We have a schedule, Rachel," he said, waving his phone like a weapon. "His family will be here at noon. I need you focused, not dragging your feet." I bit my tongue and nodded, knowing anything I said would be wrong. But when I glanced at Lily sitting at the counter with her cereal, I saw the faintest hint of a smile. It wasn't happiness, it was something sharper. She was ready. And I didn't know what that meant yet. As the morning went on, Ethan's need for control escalated. He barked orders about the turkey, the appetizers, the decorations. He criticized the way I folded the napkins, then refolded them himself with exaggerated precision. Every time I left the room, I heard him muttering under his breath about how ungrateful and incompetent I was. By the time the doorbell rang, I was already exhausted. The Whitmores arrived like royalty, Marjorie sweeping in with her fur-lined coat, Claire carrying a bouquet that somehow managed to feel like an insult, Scott trailing behind with a smirk. They barely acknowledged me before launching into commentary about the weather, their latest trips, and how busy they all were. The passive-aggressive remarks began almost immediately. "Oh," Rachel Marjorie said, glancing at the centerpiece I'd made. "How quaint. Did you get it at a craft fair?" Claire smiled sweetly. "It's nice to see you putting in effort, for once." Ethan laughed along with them, never once stepping in to defend me. At the table, the conversation turned into a performance in which I was the punchline. Claire made a joke about my little job at the library, and Scott chimed in with a remark about how lucky Ethan was to have a wife who knew her place. Each jab was followed by polite laughter, the kind that cuts sharper than open cruelty. I stayed quiet, my fork clinking softly against my plate. But Lily wasn't quiet. She was watching everything, her iPad resting innocently beside her. Every time someone made a remark, I noticed her thumb slide across the screen. She was recording not just Ethan, but all of them. Ethan noticed too, eventually. "Lily, put that thing away," he said sharply when she filmed Marjorie saying I should really try harder to keep up appearances. "I'm doing my project," she replied, her voice calm. "You said I could." "What project?" Marjorie asked, frowning. "School," Lily said simply. "Family dynamics." The words hung in the air for a moment before conversation resumed, but I could see Ethan's jaw tightening. He didn't like it when he didn't know exactly what she was up to. By dessert, the mood had shifted. I could feel it, an undercurrent of tension humming just beneath the surface. Ethan was on edge. His family had started to notice Lily's deliberate recording, and I was starting to understand that she had a plan and that it was already in motion. Whatever she was building, she wasn't going to stop. And for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't dared to feel: anticipation. Because if Lily was planning what I thought she was planning, then this Thanksgiving might end very, very differently than Ethan expected. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It built like a storm, each moment adding another layer of pressure until the air was too heavy to breathe. Dinner had started tense, but by the time the main course was served, the tension was a living thing in the room. Ethan was in his element, carving the turkey with a smug little smile, playing the role of gracious host, while I sat quietly enduring another round of backhanded compliments from Marjorie and Claire. "You've really outdone yourself this year," Rachel Marjorie said sweetly, as if the words were a gift. I was about to thank her when she added, "It's almost like you're learning how to keep up." Claire smirked and murmured, "Progress." Ethan chuckled, looking straight at me as if daring me to react. My jaw ached from clenching it. Lily had stopped eating altogether. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the scene like a silent witness. Every so often, I'd see her glance down at her tablet check something, then look back up. Then Scott leaned back in his chair and with a glance at Ethan said, "You know some wives make a real fuss about hosting." But not Rachel. She knows her place. The table erupted in polite laughter. Everyone except me and Lily. My hands tightened around my fork. "My place." The words rang in my ears, echoing every insult, every shove. Every night I'd spent crying quietly so Lily wouldn't hear. Something in me cracked. "My place," I repeated softly. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Rachel, a warning. My place is to keep quiet while your family picks me apart. My place is to disappear when you want me invisible. My place is to take the blame for everything that goes wrong, to clean up your messes, to pretend you're a good man when you're not. The room went still. Ethan's face flushed, and the dangerous glint in his eyes told me I'd stepped too far over the invisible line. Enough, he said, his voice low and sharp. No, I said, my voice trembling, but steady. Not enough. Not anymore. That's when he stood the chair, scraping violently against the floor. That's when his hand came up. The slap was fast, loud, and absolute. Pain exploded across my cheek, my head snapping to the side. Gasps filled the room, Marjorie's sharp inhale. Claire's muttered, "Oh my God," Scott's awkward cough, and then silence. Ethan loomed over me, his chest rising and falling like a man who'd just finished a workout. "Don't you ever embarrass me in front of my family again," he snarled. For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then Lily's voice cut through the air. "Dad." She didn't shout. She didn't cry. Her voice was calm, cold, precise. Ethan turned toward her, still breathing hard. "What? You shouldn't have done that." Something in her tone made Ethan hesitate. He glanced at his family, looking for support, but they were shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Lily lifted her tablet, her small fingers steady on the edges. "I've been recording you, Dad, for weeks." The words landed like a bomb. Marjorie blinked rapidly. Claire's mouth fell open. Scott muttered, "Jesus Christ." Ethan laughed a short, humorless bark. "You think anyone will care what a kid says Lily didn't blink? I sent it all to Grandpa this morning." Ethan froze. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "Grandpa," he said, voice cracking. She nodded. "He's seen everything. He's on his way." The room shifted instantly. The Whitmores, for all their cruelty, recognized a threat when they heard one. Marjorie's eyes darted to Ethan. "What does she mean? What did you do?" Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Lily kept going, her voice even. "I recorded you calling Mom names. I recorded you shoving her, throwing things, hitting her, and I sent it all to him." His family stared, the pieces snapping into place. I looked at my daughter, the small, determined child, and realized she'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt like something unstoppable had just been set in motion. And Ethan knew it too. He wasn't in control anymore. Lily was, and she had just drawn the battle lines for everyone to see. Ethan tried to recover, straightening his tie, as if that could restore the control he'd just lost. "Rachel, get her under control." He ordered, his voice straining for authority. But it was already too late. Lily didn't flinch. She tilted the tablet just enough for the screen to face the table. The paused image was unmistakable. Ethan's hand gripping my arm so tightly, the skin was white around his fingers. "Play it, Lily." My voice surprised even me. It was low, steady, and full of something I hadn't felt in years' power. Ethan lunged toward her, but Scott's hand shot out, blocking him. "Whoa! What is this?" Marjorie demanded, her voice sharp but tinged with fear. "Evidence," Lily said. "Weeks of it. All backed up. Grandpa has it. So does Mrs. Johnson. And the police." The word police seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Claire's fork clattered to her plate. "Police?" Ethan barked a laugh, but it was too loud, too brittle. "This is insane." "She's a child," Marjorie turned on him. "You told us it was just arguments, that she was dramatic." His face twisted. "That's all it was." But even as he spoke, the sound of engines rumbled outside. Doors slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched up the driveway. The room went utterly silent. Then came the knock. No one moved. The second knock was louder, harder, impatient. Ethan looked like a cornered animal. "Rachel, say something," he hissed. "Tell them." The door swung open before he could finish. My father stepped inside, his presence filling the space like a storm rolling in. Retired Police Chief Daniel Cooper. He was still broad-shouldered, still carried himself like the man who'd broken up bar fights with one hand and written arrest reports with the other. Behind him, two uniformed officers stepped in. The sight made my knees go weak, not from fear, but from the sudden dizzying relief of being believed. Dad's gaze swept the room, taking in my flushed cheek, Ethan's defensive posture, Lily standing beside me with her tablet clutched to her chest. How long, he asked, his voice like gravel. 3 years, I said. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at me. He locked eyes with Ethan. 3 years you've been laying hands on my daughter. Ethan's mouth opened-closed. This isn't what it looks like. Daniel stepped closer, slow and deliberate. I've seen the footage. I've seen the medical records. And I've spoken to Child Protective Services. He turned his head just enough for the words to land like a hammer. You're done, Ethan. One of the officers stepped forward, unfolding a paper. Ethan Whitmore, you are hereby served with a temporary restraining order. Effective immediately, you are to vacate this residence and have no contact with your wife or daughter. Ethan laughed again, but it was hollow. This is my house. The officer didn't blink. It's in both your names. Given the evidence, the court has granted your wife temporary exclusive occupancy. Pack a bag. Now. Ethan looked to his family, but they wouldn't meet his eyes. Marjorie's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Claire and Scott looked like they were trying to blend into the wallpaper. Lily spoke up, her voice carrying clearly in the thick silence. They knew, she said, looking at each of them in turn. They all knew, and they didn't care. Marjorie's mouth opened, but nothing came out. My father took a slow breath, then nodded toward the hallway. Officers, give him 10 minutes to pack. Ethan stared at me, rage and something like fear in his eyes. This isn't over, Rachel. I felt Lily's small hand slip into mine. Yes, it is, I said. He hesitated, then turned and walked down the hall, the officers following close behind. The front door closed behind them, leaving the dining room in stunned silence. My father crouched down to Lily's level. You did good, kiddo. Her eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. I just wanted it to stop. He pulled her into a hug, then looked up at me. It has. The moment Ethan was out of the house, it felt like a dam had cracked. The silence he left behind wasn't peaceful. It was charged electric, like everyone in the room was suddenly aware of just how far things had gone. My father straightened, looking at me with that steady, grounding presence he'd always had when I was a child. You ready to finish this? He asked. My pulse hammered in my ears, but I nodded. I'd been silent for too long. I turned to face the Whitmores, who were still sitting stiffly at the table as if afraid to move. For years you've watched him tear me down, I began, my voice trembling, but growing stronger with each word. You've mocked me, belittled me, laughed when he humiliated me. And you pretended it was normal. Marjorie's eyes darted toward the kitchen like she was looking for an escape. Claire's arms were crossed tightly, her lips pressed into a line. Scott stared at the floor. Lily took a step closer to me, still holding her tablet like a weapon. I could feel her support, her presence like a shield at my side. You didn't just let it happen, I said, my gaze sweeping the table. You encouraged it. You gave him permission to treat me like I was nothing. And now the truth is out. You don't get to pretend you didn't know. You don't get to say you were fooled. The flush in Marjorie's face deepened. That's not fair, she started, but Lily cut her off. It's fair, she said sharply. I have proof of everything you said to her. Marjorie turned to her, the fake sweetness gone from her voice. You've been listening to things that aren't your concern. Lily's eyes narrowed. It's my mom. That's my concern. My father stepped in, his tone, firm but calm. You're all lucky the officers didn't decide to charge you for aiding and abetting. Claire's head snapped up, eyes wide. That's a thing, my father gave her a flat look. It is when there's evidence you knew a crime was being committed and you did nothing to stop it. The air grew heavier. Scott shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the door as if he wanted to vanish. I turned back to Lily. Show them. Without a word, she tapped her screen. The video played, the audio unmistakable. Marjorie's voice calling me stupid, Ethan, laughing, someone else chiming in with a jab about how I'd married up. Every sound, every sneer was there. Claire's face drained of color. Scott swore under his breath. That's enough, Marjorie snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. My father didn't move. Let it play. The video rolled on clips of Ethan's outbursts, the slammed doors, the shouts, the moments where I flinched from his touch. By the time it ended, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I took a deep breath. I'm not the same woman you've been pushing around for years. I'm done playing the role you wrote for me. And I'm not afraid of any of you anymore. My father put a hand on my shoulder, a quiet show of solidarity. The officers returned just then, Ethan's duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He's leaving one of them, said. No trouble. Marjorie looked like she wanted to say something, but instead she stood muttering about needing air and walked out. Claire followed. Scott trailed behind without looking at me. The house felt cavernous, with just the three of us left standing in the dining room. My father turned to me. Pack your things. Tonight you and Lily come home with me. I hesitated, glancing at the table, the food still sitting there as if nothing had happened. This was supposed to be Thanksgiving. My father's voice softened. It still can be. Just not here. Not with them. Lily slipped her hand into mine. Mom, she said quietly, Grandpa's house feels more like home anyway. And just like that, I knew she was right. This wasn't our home anymore. It had been a prison, and we'd just broken out. 2 weeks later, I sat across from my lawyer in a small but immaculately organized office downtown. The folder on the desk between us was thick, crammed with printed emails, medical records, and Lily's meticulously cataloged videos. With this, my lawyer said, tapping the folder, we're looking at a clean divorce, full custody, and a strong criminal case. She slid another document toward me. Temporary exclusive occupancy is already in place, but will file for permanent once the divorce is finalized. I nodded, the reality of it settling in. Ethan wasn't just out of the house, he was out of our lives, at least for now, and with every passing day, the likelihood of him returning diminished. The court date came quickly. Ethan showed up in a wrinkled suit, his arrogance visibly cracked. His lawyer tried to argue that the videos were taken out of context, but the judge's face told the story she'd seen enough domestic violence cases to recognize the truth. When Lily's name came up, the room tensed. The judge turned to her with a gentleness I hadn't expected in a courtroom. Young lady, you've been very brave, she said. Lily sat up straighter. I just wanted to help my mom. The judge's expression softened. And you did. Ethan's attorney attempted one last push for joint custody, but the moment the court heard about the active CPS investigation and saw the restraining order, that door slammed shut. Sole custody granted to me with only supervised visitation allowed, if Lily even wanted it. Outside the courthouse, Ethan's family was conspicuously absent. Word had spread quickly, and their own social standing mattered more than defending him. I'd heard whispers that Marjorie was telling people she never really liked Ethan's temper, as if that erased years of enabling him. 3 months later, the criminal trial began. The prosecution didn't just rely on Lily's recordings. They'd subpoenaed neighbors, coworkers, and even a doctor who treated me for a fractured wrist 2 years ago. One by one, the lies Ethan had built his image on collapsed. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on multiple counts of assault, domestic violence, and harassment. The sentence, 2.5 years in state prison plus mandatory counseling and a permanent protective order. The day he was taken away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: safety. That night, Lily and I sat on the couch in our temporary apartment. Is he really gone? She asked, almost afraid to believe it. For a long time, I said. And when he gets out, he can't come near us. She nodded, processing that. Good. There was no triumph in her tone, just quiet certainty. The kind you get when justice has been served. But the real blow to Ethan wasn't the prison sentence. It was the silence. His family cut contact. Friends he'd bragged to stopped answering his calls. His reputation in the business community, once untouchable, was gone. I'd heard his former business partner had pushed him out entirely. Even the house which he'd fought to claim ended up sold to pay off debts from the legal battle. Everything he'd used to control us status money connections was stripped away. I didn't celebrate. Not exactly. But I didn't feel guilty either. He'd built his life on power over others, and when that power was gone, so was the life. He'd done that to himself. Lily, though, had her own way of marking the moment. She took the old tablet, the one she'd used to record everything, and locked it in a box in her closet. Not to forget, she told me, but to remember that we can win. I realized then that this wasn't just about punishing Ethan. It was about proving to ourselves that we were never as powerless as he'd made us believe. And now he'd finally learned what it meant to be powerless. 6 months later, the apartment finally felt like ours. Not just a place we stayed in, but a home. The walls weren't echoing with slammed doors or shouted insults. The air wasn't heavy with the constant fear of saying the wrong thing. Instead, there was music sometimes, and laughter, and the smell of cinnamon rolls baking on Saturday mornings because Lily had decided it was our new tradition. I'd gone back to school, nursing school, something Ethan used to mock me for even considering. Balancing classes, work, and parenting wasn't easy, but every late night of studying felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Lily would sit at the kitchen table doing her homework across from me, her brow furrowed in the same way mine did when I was concentrating. Sometimes she'd glance up and smile like she was checking to make sure I was still there. I always was. My father visited often, sometimes bringing dinner, sometimes just to check the locks and make sure we still felt safe. He never talked much about that night at Thanksgiving, but every so often he'd give me a look, a quiet acknowledgement that we'd survived something together. Lily, though, didn't shy away from it. "Do you think other kids have to do what I did?" she asked me one night while we washed dishes. Record stuff. Make a plan. I wished I could tell her no. "I hope not," I said. "But if they do, I hope they're as smart and brave as you were." She didn't smile at that, just nodded thoughtfully. "Brave doesn't mean not scared," she said. "It just means doing what you have to do even when you're scared." I'd told her that once years ago when she was little and afraid of thunderstorms. Hearing it back now, I realized she'd been listening all along. Our evenings became quieter, simpler. We'd make dinner together, then watch old movies, or sit on the balcony talking about our days. Sometimes she'd ask about when I was younger, about my childhood, about my dreams before Ethan. Those conversations hurt. In a way, they reminded me how much of myself I'd set aside. But they also reminded me I was still here. And every time I answered her honestly, I felt a little stronger. One afternoon, after a long shift at the hospital, where I'd started my clinical training, I came home to find Lily at the dining table with another girl from her school. They were whispering over a phone, the other girl's face tight with worry. Lily glanced up at me. "Mom, this is Sophie. She's going through something." It didn't take long to understand. I saw the same wariness in Sophie's eyes that I used to see in the mirror. I made them cocoa, and while they drank it, Lily explained softly, calmly, how she'd recorded her dad, how she'd made sure someone trustworthy had the evidence, how she'd stayed careful until the right moment. Sophie listened like every word was a lifeline. When they left the table, Lily took me aside. "I told her she's not tattling," she said. "She's protecting herself and her mom, like I did for you." I pulled her into a hug. She didn't resist. "You're helping her the way you helped me," I said. "The way you helped us." And in that moment, I realized the healing wasn't just mine. It was hers too. We were both bigger now, louder now, more certain of our place in the world. We'd rebuilt something Ethan had spent years trying to destroy. And it wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was ours. When I look back at that night, the one that started with a slap in front of 12 people and ended with my father standing in the doorway like an avenging shadow, I realize it wasn't just the end of something, it was the beginning. The beginning of telling the truth out loud. The beginning of seeing myself not as someone who put up with it, but as someone who survived it. And it was the beginning of Lily stepping into her own power even at 9 years old and deciding she wasn't going to live in fear anymore. People sometimes ask me if I regret staying as long as I did. I don't give them the answer they expect. No, I tell them. Because when I left, I was ready, and I made sure he couldn't follow. The truth is, walking away from someone like Ethan isn't just about leaving, it's about dismantling the grip they have over you piece by piece until there's nothing left for them to hold. That's what Lily and I did. She took the first step, quietly gathering the proof, and I took the next, refusing to hide anymore. Together, we pulled the whole thing down around him. And when it was over, when the dust settled and he was sitting in a prison cell, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control over my own life. But revenge wasn't the whole story. The rest was about what we built after. A life where Lily can invite friends over without worrying if raised voices mean danger. A home where she can fall asleep without checking the locks twice. A space where she can be a child again, and I can be her mother without fear being the third person in the room. If there's anything I want other women, other mothers to take from our story, it's this: silence is what keeps men like Ethan safe. Silence is what lets their families smile and pretend nothing's wrong. And silence is what convinces you that no one would believe you if you spoke. But the truth has more weight than fear if you give it the chance. It can cut through years of gaslighting and control. It can pull people out of the shadows who will stand beside you when you make your move. It can change everything. I tell women now, if you can't speak yet, gather. Gather proof. Gather allies. Gather courage in small, steady amounts until you have enough to make your stand. Because when you do, it won't just be your voice, it'll be the weight of everything you've carried finally coming down on the person who put it there. And the sound of that is something you never forget. Lily once told me she doesn't think of what she did as brave. I just did what needed to be done, she said. But that's exactly what bravery is. Doing what needs to be done even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared. 3 years from that night, we're still free. Ethan is still paying for his choices. And I still keep a copy of Lily's recordings locked away, not because I need them now, but because they remind me of the line we crossed and never went back. They remind me that we were never powerless even when we felt like we were. And if someone hearing our story realizes the same thing about themselves, then all of it, the fear, the fight, the fallout, will have been worth it. Because sometimes justice isn't a courtroom verdict. Sometimes it's a little girl holding a tablet in a dining room full of people who thought they'd never be exposed and saying 5 words that change everything. Grandpa is going to see.